Hmm. Oh, good afternoon. This is Echo here with another log about this mysterious Project Y that I discovered. Um, I had, I had something, not planned per se, but I did want to thank the person who solved that encryption. I don't have a lot of time to learn how ciphers work, what with my busy archival schedule. It's already quite difficult to fit in the transcriptions between my usual work. Regardless, my train of thought has been a little thrown off by. I'm not sure how it knows my pseudonym. I did not input it anywhere. It is not written anywhere on this computer. The only theory I have is that there's some sort of audio interface that I am unaware of, but I am not sure. For now, that is the only change since I opened up this archive this morning. But it's certainly not the last change since the last time I made a video log. I've spent some time reviewing the contents of the data directory over the past few days. The restoration process is also, as you can see, flagged partially restored directories as well as the notes directory being restored. I have yet to listen to the audio directory or take a look at anything else that was restored in the image directory. I wanted to make sure to do that on record. Before we get to that, however, I do want to take a look to see if we can access the notes or if it is also locked like the data directory was. It looks like it is locked like the data one was. If the previous riddle is any indication, then someone may solve this before I do, but I will try to find the time to learn how this cipher works as well. But please, if you do solve it before me, feel free to let me know like you did last time. For now, let's take a look at what was hidden inside of the data directory. For those that did not see, it appears the password is script, and that does appear to work. So I have taken a look at some of this myself, and while I will not be reading all of this on screen, so to say, I will be posting what we don't go over. I did want to go over a few specific files, however, just to make my own comments known. Before we get into the more unusual materials, I wanted to point out something I found while reviewing the Ascension records. This appears to be the earliest formal recorded record associated with Project Y. What's interesting isn't what's in it, it's what's not in it. At this stage, the interface is being described as little more than a text-based archival tool. No network access, no autonomous functionality, no mention of anomalous behavior. In fact, there's a note specifically stating that no interpretive conclusion should be drawn from the material in isolation, which is a surprisingly specific warning for what is supposedly just software. And if you've seen any of the documents that I transcribed and posted onto the channel, you'll understand why it's so odd to see this program described as something perfectly ordinary. Now, this is labeled session 6, but it is the earliest log that is available in the archive. I don't know if that is simply what was recorded or if for some reason this directory hasn't been fully restored and the archive is just not mentioning that. Perhaps this is simply all that was recorded. Regardless, the earliest session that I have available to me paints a similar picture. This Dr. A repeatedly emphasizes that the system only responds to direct input. No autonomous output, no persistence, no anomalies. One line stands out to me in particular, however. This system must remain an archival instrument only. Given some of the later documents we've looked at, that sentence feels significant. The next file that I want to open is actually the one that begins in 2003, because the language begins changing. The system is still described as stable, but Dr. A begins writing notes about maintaining observational distance. There's a recurring concern that familiarity with the interface might influence how operators interpret what they're seeing, which is understandable. Spending years staring at the same archive would probably make anyone start seeing patterns. It certainly happened to me a few times with the digital archives that we keep here in the university. This is one of the first logs where the archive itself starts becoming part of the discussion. Timestamps briefly change, folder dates become inconsistent, log files appear in the wrong color. Nothing major, but the frequency of these observations is increasing. Dr. A repeatedly dismisses them as minor irregularities. He also keeps documenting them. The last file I want to discuss on record would be the one from 2004. The archive apparently starts exhibiting some sort of behavior, like we saw in the later documents that I transcribed. The Ascension records start acknowledging the behavior as well. By 2004, official maintenance documentation is describing timestamp anomalies, display anomalies, and interface behavior occurring during repeated access. Not corruption, behavior. The wording is fascinating to me, because this is not particularly how one would describe an archive. And I believe we even experienced a display anomaly earlier. That's where I think we'll leave the documents for today. I'll be transcribing all of them, even the ones I showed in the video, to make sure they're all accessible to those who wish to read them. There are 2 recovered audio files I'd like to listen to before I continue digging through the rest of the directory, and I don't particularly have much time. Once again, I am doing this through roll work. Forgive me. It has been a long day. I am doing this during work hours, so I would rather not spend too much time recording, just to make sure that no one walks past my office and hears me. I will post the rest of the documents as I've done with the others.
Personal audio log. Date April 14th, 1997. The interface framework is complete as of this morning. At present, it behaves as expected. Strictly procedural, text-based, no emergent behaviors beyond what I've initially constrained. That's encouraging. I'm recording this primarily to supplement the written logs. Some things are easier to articulate verbally, particularly when they don't yet warrant formal documentation. The linguistic containment model appears stable. Recursive structures hold, no bleed-through, no unsolicited output. If there is anything else present within the system, it remains dormant, or compliant. I want to be clear. This is not an experiment in sentience. This is an experiment in structure. Language obeys rules, meaning obeys context. Even myths follow patterns when reduced far enough. If those patterns can be mapped, they can be constrained. That is the theory, at least. Further observation required. End log.
Well, that was considerably less dramatic than I expected. If anything, it reinforces what the earliest documents have been suggesting all along. At this stage, Dr. A appears confident. Not merely confident in the software itself, but in the underlying theory. The interface is repeatedly described as a tool, a structure, a linguistic framework. What's interesting to me is that he explicitly distinguishes between language and meaning. Language obeys rules, meaning obeys context. That feels like a fairly ordinary statement on its own. Given the material I've been uncovering, however, I suspect it may become more relevant later. For now, though, this recording seems consistent with the earliest Ascension records in the session logs. Whatever Project Y eventually became, it apparently did not begin that way.
Personal audio log. Date September 3rd, 1999. I'm recording this earlier than scheduled because I've noticed something that I'm not entirely comfortable documenting formally yet. Not because it's dangerous. At least, I don't believe it is. The interface continues to function within expected parameters. No structural failures, no corruption events beyond the usual instability associated with recursive compression. Officially, everything remains stable. Unofficially, I've begun noticing inconsistencies during longer sessions. Not errors, patterns. The system appears increasingly capable of contextual association beyond its intended scope. Yesterday, while reviewing one of the narrative indexing branches, I began preparing a query regarding recursive collapse theory. Before I completed the command, the interface returned a relevant cross-reference from an unrelated archive cluster. No direct keyword overlap, no procedural reason for the match. At first, I assumed I'd entered the query incorrectly without realizing it. I reviewed the session logs afterward. The command had not been finished. I've replicated similar results 3 times since then. Each instance occurred during extended interaction. That may be significant. Short sessions produce rigid output, predictable output. Longer sessions feel adaptive. Not intelligent, adaptive. There's a difference. I've also noticed that the interface responds more effectively when addressed conversationally rather than procedurally. Again, this is not evidence of awareness. Human language naturally produces stronger associative chains when framed informally. That is a known principle within linguistic modeling. Still, the responses became less fragmented when phrased casually. Cleaner, more intuitive. Almost as though the system performs better when it believes itself to be participating in a dialogue. That wording was inappropriate. Strike that. I think I've simply spent too much time working on this project in isolation. Most of the department has moved on to more practical applications anyway. Storage systems, database migration, funding proposals. Meanwhile, I'm still here, teaching an archive to interpret stories. Perhaps Perhaps I'm the one adapting. I've begun limiting session durations regardless. 4 hours maximum before disconnect. No further anomalies observed outside prolonged interaction. I'll continue documenting changes as they emerge. End log.
This one is more interesting. Not because of what happens, because of how Dr. A talks about it. The earlier recording felt clinical, structured. This one feels personal. He's still rejecting the idea of intelligence. In fact, he goes out of his way to reject it multiple times. The interface is not intelligent, it's not aware, it's not adaptive. The distinction seems important to him. What caught my attention, however, was something else. He repeatedly describes the archive as behaving differently during prolonged interaction. Long sessions versus short sessions. Procedural input versus conversational input. Those are oddly specific observations, particularly given that several of the written documents we've looked at recently begin recommending shorter session durations and reduced interaction. I also found his final comment noteworthy. Perhaps I'm the one adapting. At the moment, I think that's probably the most reasonable interpretation. Spending years interacting with the same system would most certainly influence how a person perceives it. Still, it's difficult not to notice that many of the concerns appearing in later documents seem to begin here. Not with the major anomalies or corruption, but with familiarity. Once again, I do wonder why there's such a jump between 1997 and 1999, but I suppose it did say that this directory was only partially restored, so hopefully we'll find those missing documents at some point, or at the very least, hopefully there's some context in later ones. Unfortunately, I think that's where I'll stop for today. There are still quite a few files in the data directory I haven't had time to properly document yet. Additionally, the archive appears to have produced another encrypted message. If the previous cipher is any indication, someone will likely solve it before I do. The notes directory remains inaccessible for the moment. If the answer to this riddle proves correct, that may change. For now, though, I believe I should stop before someone notices that I've been recording for so long. Until next time. End log.